the small and cozy house located in a suburban neighborhood lived Helen, a 50-year-old woman with her only daughter, Alice. Helen was a strong-spirited woman, known for her kindness and welcoming smile. Many years ago, Helen had been abandoned by her husband, leaving her alone to raise Alice. Since then, she had transformed into a true warrior, dedicating herself entirely to providing her daughter with a home filled with love and understanding. Helen worked as a nurse at a local hospital. Her shifts were long and exhausting, but she never complained. Her focus was on ensuring Alice had everything she needed. She remembered the countless nights when, after a tiring shift, she would come home and still find the energy to help Alice with her homework, prepare dinner, and read a bedtime story. One of Alice's most memorable memories was when she was 8, and Helen organized a surprise birthday party for her. Helen had worked a double shift to pay for the party, and even though exhausted, decorated the house with colorful balloons and baked a chocolate cake. "Mom, how did you manage to do all this?" Alice asked, her eyes sparkling with joy. "When you love someone, Alice, you always find a way," Helen replied with a tired but satisfied smile. The challenges were many, but Helen always found the strength to overcome each obstacle. During the difficult years, Helen and Alice formed an unbreakable bond. They supported each other and, even in adversity, found moments of happiness. Helen always made sure to be present for the important moments in Alice's life. She was there at every school play, shouting Alice's name from the audience and applauding enthusiastically. Once, when Alice was 12, she participated in a school essay contest. Helen stayed up late nights, helping Alice revise her text. "You can do it, Alice. Your story is wonderful and will touch many hearts," Helen would say, encouraging her daughter. The effort paid off. Alice won the contest and dedicated the prize to her mother, thanking her for all the unconditional support and love. When Alice finished school, Helen knew the next challenge would be college. Despite limited resources, she encouraged Alice to pursue her dreams. Helen saved every penny, sacrificing her own needs to ensure Alice could get the best education possible. Alice, now 18, was about to take a big step in her life: college. Helen felt a mix of pride and apprehension at the thought of her daughter's imminent departure. As she helped Alice pack her bags, Helen recalled the moments they spent together, from Alice's first steps to the late-night study sessions for her high school exams. "Mum, will you be okay here alone?" Alice asked, her voice laden with concern. "Of course, dear. I will miss you, but this is a wonderful opportunity for you. I want you to enjoy every moment," Helen replied, trying to hide the melancholy in her eyes. On the day of departure, Helen's heart ached as she watched Alice board the bus that would take her to university. The house suddenly seemed large and empty. The first days were especially hard. Helen missed the lively conversations, the laughter, and even the sound of pages turning. To combat the loneliness, Helen decided to adopt a puppy. After a visit to the local shelter, she found a small, adorable mutt that seemed meant for her. She named him Max. He was an energetic puppy, with bright eyes and a tail that never stopped wagging. From the moment Max entered the house, he brought a new breath of life and joy. Helen and Max quickly became inseparable. The little mutt brought new energy and joy to Helen's life, and together they created a routine filled with special moments. Within the first few weeks, Max learned to follow Helen around the house, and she found comfort in the constant company of her new friend. One of the most memorable mornings was when Helen and Max discovered a new path during one of their daily walks. The path led to a small grove where the sun filtered through the leaves of the trees, creating a magical setting. Helen sat on a fallen log, watching Max run joyfully after falling leaves. "Look, Max, we found our special spot," Helen said, smiling as she watched the dog leap and play. In the afternoons, Helen loved sitting on the porch with Max by her side. She would light a cigarette and drink her coffee, feeling the gentle breeze while talking to Max about her day. The leaves danced in the wind, and the aroma of coffee mingled with the smell of freshly cut grass. Max, always attentive, would lie at Helen's feet, looking up at her with his bright, loving eyes. "You know, Max, I miss Alice so much. She's growing up so fast, and I wish I could be closer to her," Helen would say, running her hand through Max's soft fur. At night, Helen and Max would cozy up on the couch watching old movies. Helen would make popcorn, and Max would sit beside her, occasionally getting a few pieces as a treat. One night, while watching a classic film, Helen looked at Max and smiled. "You're great company, Max. The house doesn't feel so empty with you here," Helen said, petting Max's head. On another occasion, Helen decided to have a picnic in the park. She prepared sandwiches, brought fresh fruit, and of course some treats for Max. Sitting on the grass, Helen and Max enjoyed the sun and the park's tranquility. Max chased butterflies while Helen laughed at his antics. These joyful moments brought a new breath of life to Helen. She found in Max a loyal and loving companion who helped her cope with the loneliness and longing for Alice. At night, before bed, Helen often talked to Max about her worries and hopes for the future. "Max, I hope Alice is doing well and making lots of friends at college. She's so special, she deserves all the best," Helen would say while Max listened attentively, as if understanding every word. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The routine Helen and Max created together was filled with laughter, adventures, and, above all, a lot of love. Helen felt grateful for finding Max and knew that, with him by her side, she could face any challenge. Years passed, and Max grew up alongside Helen. They celebrated Helen's birthdays and Alice's occasional visits together. Helen fondly remembered the day Alice visited during Christmas. Max, dressed in a red sweater, ran around the Christmas tree, delighting everyone. Helen prepared a big feast, and the house was filled with laughter and joy. When Alice graduated from college and announced she would marry John, Helen felt a pang of pride but also of anticipated longing. The house would once again be silent. The wedding was a joyful celebration. But Helen couldn't help feeling the loneliness return when Alice left with her husband for a new life in another city. Max, sensing Helen's mood, became even closer, offering her the silent comfort only a pet can provide. Together, they faced the days of loneliness and long nights, finding solace in each other's presence. One night, Helen sat on the porch with Max by her side. She lit a cigarette, and as the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, she thought of Alice. The longing tightened her chest, and she found herself talking to Max, pouring out her worries and hopes. "Max, do you think Alice is okay? She's always been so strong, but sometimes I worry so much," Helen said, looking at the stars in the sky. Max looked at Helen with his understanding eyes and laid his head on her lap. Helen sighed, feeling a little more at peace with Max's comforting presence. Then, on a rainy afternoon, the phone rang. Helen answered, and on the other end of the line heard Alice's trembling and desperate voice. "Mom, I need you. Something terrible has happened," Alice said, her voice filled with panic and despair. Helen's heart raced and a chill ran down her spine. Max, sensing the tension, moved closer, pressing against her for support. "Alice, what happened? Talk to me," Helen responded, trying to stay calm while her heart tightened with worry. The call was full of interference, but Helen managed to gather enough to understand that something very serious had happened to John. Feeling a mix of fear and urgency, Helen knew she had to act quickly. Helen felt a chill run down her spine as she listened to Alice's trembling voice. The following words left her in shock. John, Alice's husband, had been murdered. He was refueling the car at a gas station when armed robbers invaded the place. The robbery quickly turned into a violent act, and John was shot while trying to protect a clerk who was being threatened. The scene was desolate. The flashing lights of police cars, the yellow tape isolating the area, and the distant sound of sirens created a tragic atmosphere. Alice arrived at the gas station just minutes after the incident, only to find her husband lying on the ground, already lifeless, surrounded by paramedics and police officers. The horror and pain she felt at that moment were indescribable. "Mom, I don't know what to do. They killed John. He tried to be a hero and now he's gone," Alice said, sobbing as Helen tried to find words of comfort, but also felt devastated by the news. Helen pressed the phone to her ear, trying to be strong for her daughter. "Alice, my love, come home. We'll get through this together. I'll be here for you as I always have," Helen said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the tears starting to fill her eyes. Alice agreed, knowing she needed her mother more than ever. The decision was made. She would return to the house where she grew up, seeking comfort and safety. As she hung up the phone, Helen hugged Max, feeling the weight of the tragedy and the urgent need to be strong for her daughter. Max, sensing Helen's anguish, licked her hands in a gesture of comfort. Helen knew that the days ahead would be difficult, but she was determined to help Alice overcome this terrible loss. The days following Alice's return to Helen's house were shrouded in a cloud of sadness and desolation. Alice was devastated by John's loss. She spent long hours locked in the room that was once her childhood refuge, looking at photos and mementos of her husband, trying to find some sense in the tragedy that had destroyed her life. Helen, in turn, was desperate to help her daughter out of the darkness that enveloped her. But she knew it wouldn't be easy. Alice was sinking into a deep depression, and each day seemed like a new challenge. One morning, Helen decided it was time to try something different. She prepared Alice's favorite breakfast, pancakes with fresh strawberries and cream. She took the tray to the room and sat beside her daughter. "Alice, dear, I know it hurts. I know nothing I say will bring John back, but we need to keep going, for us, for him," Helen said, her voice choked with emotion. Alice looked at her mother, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She tried to force a smile, but the pain was evident. "Mom, I don't know how to go on. Everything feels so empty without him," Alice replied, tears streaming down her face. Helen held her daughter's hand firmly, trying to convey all the strength and love she felt. "We'll do this together, one day at a time, and I promise I'll be by your side no matter what," Helen said, trying to hold back her own tears. Max, always attentive, jumped onto the bed and lay next to Alice, resting his head on her lap. He seemed to understand Alice's pain and wanted to comfort her in the best way he knew how. The days continued to be difficult. Alice had crying spells and moments when she could barely get out of bed. Helen did her best to keep the house running and create an environment of support and love. She encouraged Alice to go for short walks with Max, hoping the fresh air and the comforting presence of the dog would help. One afternoon, Helen and Alice were sitting on the porch. Helen lit a cigarette and handed a cup of coffee to Alice. Max lay at their feet, looking up at them with his wise eyes. "You know, Max, when your dad left us, I thought I would never be able to move on. But you and I found a way, didn't we?" Helen said, looking at the dog. Alice looked at her mother, realizing for the first time the strength and resilience Helen had shown over the years. "Mum, how did you do it? How did you find the strength to go on?" Alice asked, her voice a whisper of hope. Helen smiled, a small but determined smile. "I found strength in you, Alice, and now we'll find strength together," Helen replied. As time passed, small signs of recovery began to appear. Alice started getting out of bed a little earlier, helping Helen with household chores, and even laughing at Max's antics. Helen knew the road ahead would be long, but these small progresses were proof that there was hope. Months went by, and Alice began to find small fragments of happiness again. The pain of losing John never completely disappeared, but the constant presence and unconditional love of Helen and Max were crucial to her recovery. Helen encouraged Alice to go out more, reconnect with friends, and explore new opportunities. It was during one of these outings that Alice met Michael. They met at a local cafe, where Alice often went to write in her journal and reflect on life. Michael was kind, attentive, and above all, understanding. He had also gone through his own loss and knew exactly what to say to offer comfort. "May I sit here?" Michael asked, smiling gently. Alice looked at him, a bit surprised, but felt an instant connection. "Sure, please," she replied, gesturing to the empty seat. The conversation started casually, talking about books, movies, and their lives. Over time, these conversations turned into something deeper, and Alice found in Michael a new source of support and joy. They began spending more time together, and Michael became a constant presence in her life. Helen, noticing the positive change in Alice, was happy to see her daughter smiling again. However, at the same time, she started to notice something worrisome in her own health. Helen, always so active, began to feel persistent fatigue and pains that wouldn't go away. She tried to hide her worries from Alice, but Max, with his sensitivity, seemed to sense that something was wrong. One night, while Alice and Michael were in the living room watching a movie, Helen had a coughing fit that left her visibly weakened. Alice rushed to the kitchen, worried, and found Helen leaning on the counter, trying to catch her breath. "Mom, what's happening? Are you sick?" Alice asked, concern evident in her voice. Helen tried to smile, but the pain was evident. "I'm just a little tired, dear. It must be my age," Helen replied, trying to minimize the situation. Alice wasn't convinced. In the following days, she insisted that Helen see a doctor. After several tests, the news was devastating. Helen had a serious illness, and the prognosis was not good. Alice felt her world crumble around her, but knew she had to be strong, just as Helen had always been for her. Michael stood by Alice's side, offering unconditional support and love. Together, they dedicated themselves to caring for Helen, doing everything they could to provide comfort and happiness in the days that remained. Max, as faithful as ever, never left Helen's side, lying at her feet and offering as much comfort as he could. The illness progressed, and each day was a struggle. But even in the most difficult moments, Helen maintained her unyielding strength and spirit. She found joy in the little things, Michael's visits, walks in the park with Max, and most importantly, moments of closeness with Alice. One afternoon, while Helen was lying on the couch, Alice sat beside her and held her hand. "Mum, I love you so much. I don't know what I'll do without you," Alice said with tears in her eyes. Helen, with a weak but loving voice, replied, "You'll keep living, Alice. You'll find happiness, love and strength. And I'll always be with you in every smile, in every memory." Alice knew that the farewell was near, but she also knew that her mother's love and lessons would guide her forever. As she looked at Helen, she felt deep gratitude for all the moments they had shared, and a renewed determination to honor the legacy of strength and love that Helen would leave behind. 2 years had passed since Helen's death. The pain of loss still existed in Alice's heart, but she had found ways to honor her mother's memory and move forward. With Michael's support, Alice built a new life filled with love and hope. They married in a simple and intimate ceremony, surrounded by their closest friends and memories of Helen. Alice and Michael now had their own family. They welcomed a baby, Emily, who brought new joy to their lives. Emily was a child full of energy and curiosity, and Alice saw a bit of her mother in every smile and laugh of her daughter. The house that once felt full of silence was now filled with laughter, conversations, and the soft sound of little feet running through the hallways. Max, the faithful companion, was still by Alice's side. However, time had not been kind to him. Now, 17 years old, Max was old and tired. His steps were slower, and he spent most of the day lying in his favorite corner of the living room. Even so, his presence continued to be a source of comfort and love for Alice. Helen's absence was deeply felt by everyone, but especially by Max. The dog seemed to understand that his owner would never return. He was often found on the porch, lying in the spot where Helen used to sit to drink coffee and smoke a cigarette. He would look at the door as if expecting her to appear at any moment with a smile on her face and a cup of coffee in her hand. Alice noticed the sadness in Max's eyes and tried to comfort him as best she could. Many nights she would sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, waiting for Max to join her. "Max, I know you miss Mom as much as I do, but we're in this together, okay?" Alice would say, stroking Max's head as he rested it on her lap. Max would sigh deeply as if understanding every word. These moments were a way for both of them to cope with the loss and longing for Helen. Even on the saddest days, Alice tried to maintain a routine that brought some comfort to Max. They continued their walks in the park, although now they were shorter and slower. Max would walk beside Alice, his tail wagging gently, but the vitality of his younger years had faded. One afternoon, while Emily played in the garden with Michael, Alice found Max lying on the porch, looking intently at the horizon. The image brought tears to Alice's eyes, as she knew Max was waiting for Helen. "You were her world, Max, and I know she misses you too, wherever she is," Alice said, sitting next to him. Max lifted his head and looked at Alice, his eyes filled with a sad wisdom. He licked her hand in a gesture of mutual affection and comfort. Life went on, and even without Helen, the family found ways to honor her memory and move forward. Alice knew that, with the love and support of Michael. and the faithful companionship of Max, they could face any challenge. Months passed, and despite the care and love he received, Max began showing signs that his time was coming to an end. His health deteriorated, and he spent more time resting than playing. Alice, Michael, and even little Emily made sure to give Max all the affection and comfort he deserved, knowing how much he meant to everyone. One morning, Alice found Max lying on the porch in the spot where Helen used to sit. He seemed at peace, but his breathing was weak. Alice knelt beside him, gently stroking his head. "Max, you were the best friend anyone could have. I love you so much," Alice said with tears in her eyes. Max looked at Alice with his tired but loving eyes. He seemed to understand that his time was coming. That afternoon, Max closed his eyes for the last time, surrounded by Alice, Michael, and Emily. The pain of loss was deep, but there was also a sense of peace, knowing that Max was now with Helen. The family decided to have a simple ceremony in the garden where Max always loved to play. They dug a small hole under Max's favorite tree, a place where he used to lie and watch the world around him. "Max, you brought so much joy and love to our lives. You will always be in our hearts," Michael said, placing a flower on the small grave. Emily, still too young to fully understand death, held her parents' hands, looking curiously and sadly at what was happening. Alice, holding Emily's little hand tightly, felt a mix of sadness for losing Max and gratitude for all the moments they had shared. "Max, you were a true member of our family. Thank you for everything," Alice said, her voice choked as she placed Max's favorite toy beside him. After the ceremony, the family sat on the porch, the place that now held so many memories of Helen and Max. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Michael brought a tray with coffee and cookies, and they sat together, reminiscing about the happy moments they had with Max. "I remember when Max first came here, so small and full of energy. He brought so much joy to our lives," Alice said, smiling through her tears. "And he will always be with us, in our memories and in our hearts," Michael added, holding Alice's hand. Emily, sitting on her mother's lap, looked at her parents and said, "Mum, is Max with Grandma now?" Alice smiled and replied, "Yes, dear. He's with Grandma Helen, playing and running free." As the family remained united, Alice felt an inner peace. She knew that despite the losses and difficulties, the love and memories that Helen and Max left behind would always be a source of strength and comfort. Life went on, and with Michael and Emily by her side, Alice knew she could face any challenge. And so, sitting on the porch watching the sunset, the family found a moment of happiness and sadness, united by the love and memories of those who had passed, but who would continue to live in their hearts forever.